A boot caught her in the mouth, and the sound of it went through me like something I was going to carry for a long time. I want to be honest about that night because I think about it often, and because honesty is the only thing that makes it worth telling. I was there. I did not stop it. That is the fact I have to live inside, and I am going to tell this story straight through that fact without cleaning it up, because the men who were there and the men who read this deserve an accurate account. She had arrived at the unit 3 days before. Transfer paperwork, nothing unusual in the form's specialty unspecified, rank visible as E7, which should have been enough for anyone paying attention to pause and think. E7 in our community at the age she appeared to be meant something, meant it said something about the number of years and the kind of years. Nobody paused. Nobody thought about it. She was quiet, that was the first thing. She set up her bunk in the corner, stowed her gear with the economy of someone who has done it in 100 different rooms, and went about her initial week duties without drawing comment or seeking conversation. She answered questions when asked, otherwise kept to herself. Ate fast, slept disciplined hours, was visible in physical training before the rest of the unit had its boots laced. I watched her in those first 3 days the way a man watches something he hasn't categorized yet. I was not hostile. I was not welcoming either. I was waiting to see what kind of operator she was, which is the only honest thing I can say about my posture in those first days. Petty Officer Grotch had a different posture entirely. Grotch was 6 years in the unit, 31 years old, built like a man who had made his size a primary self-descriptor, and had spent considerable effort maintaining the accuracy of that description. He had the particular authority of a man who has been in a place long enough to set the tone of it without anyone specifically granting him that role, and in our unit at Tidewater Station he set a certain kind of tone. Not leadership. Tone. The difference matters, and I knew the difference at the time, which is part of what I have to live with. Grotch looked at her paperwork on day 1 and made a comment I will not repeat in full because it is not worth the space. The substance was that the unit was going soft, and that the reason it was going soft was standing in the corner bunk. 2 of the other men laughed, 3 said nothing, I said nothing. She was not in the room. On day 2, Grotch had introduced himself to her formally in front of 3 of us, which was a performance more than an introduction. He called her new girl twice during the handshake. She looked at him with the level attention of someone who has catalogued exactly what she is dealing with and is noting it for purposes she has not yet declared. On day 3, at 2300, when the barracks was in the hour that should have been quiet, Grotch and 2 men I had known for 2 years moved to her bunk. What happened next lasted approximately 90 seconds. I'm going to describe it because it needs to be in the record, and because eliding it would be a different kind of dishonesty. 4 of them, Grotch and 2 others, and 1 man who should have known better and knew it, pinned her to the bunk. There was a boot that caught her in the face. There was the sound of it that I described above, and the sound stayed in the room after everything else stopped. She went down to the floor. They told her to stay down. Grotch said something about the unit not being the place for her, which was the phrase he chose, not the place for you. I was on the far side of the barracks. I did not move. That is the most uncomfortable thing I have ever written about myself, and I have written some uncomfortable things in the years since that night. She stayed on the floor for about 30 seconds, not because she couldn't get up, though she was hurt, her lip was split and there was blood. She stayed because she was doing something I recognized later as the choice of a professional. She was giving the situation time to be over before she decided what to do next. She was not panicking. She was not crying. She was lying on the floor of the barracks with blood on her chin, and doing the specific kind of thinking that people with a lot of operational time do automatically, which is sorting what has just happened into categories and determining the next correct response. She got up, slowly and with her hand on the bunk frame because her balance had been affected. She stood. She did not look at any of them. She went to the head and we heard water running, and she came back after a few minutes and she lay down on her bunk. Grotch said, "Smart girl." She said nothing. She faced the ceiling. She was still. I lay in my bunk for 3 hours that night and could not sleep. The next morning, she was at physical training before anyone else. Her lip was swollen, and there was bruising developing on the left side of her jaw that was going to darken significantly over the next 24 hours. She ran the circuit in full, the full circuit, not a modified version, and she did not favor her face, and she did not ask for modification or comment on the injury. The physical training at Tidewater Station is not casual. It includes a 2-mile water component and a weighted carry phase that the unit had designed specifically to be harder than what most people expected. She completed the morning faster than anyone else in the unit. She did it without comment or expression. She went to breakfast and sat by herself with a tray and ate. I sat 2 tables over and watched without appearing to, which is a skill I had needed at Tidewater more than at any previous posting. She ate methodically, the way people eat when they are fueling rather than tasting, and she finished and cleared her tray and left without speaking to anyone. Nobody in the chow hall said anything to her either. The room had a particular quality of managed silence that I recognized as the sound of men collectively deciding they do not know what to do with what they have seen. Grotch came in while she was still eating. He got his tray and found a seat across the room. He did not look at her directly. He ate facing the far wall, and when she stood and cleared her tray and walked past his table, he did not look up. That was the first moment I understood that whatever he had thought he was doing the night before, the morning after had already changed the geometry of it in ways he hadn't accounted for. The expression on his face when I caught it from 2 tables over was the expression of a man who has not yet decided what something means, and who may have been, for the first time in this situation, asking himself what he has done. The operation came 4 days after that. I will not describe the mission in any detail that would matter for operational reasons. What I will say is that it was a direct action tasking in coastal terrain, high-value target, compressed timeline, and one of our team leads had taken a knee injury in training 2 days prior and was on restricted status. The tasking required 6 operators. We had 5 available in the rotation plus her. The unit commander, Lieutenant Commander Wells, who had been at his desk reviewing her paperwork on the afternoon of Day 5, and whose expression during that review I had not been able to read, briefed the operation with 6 names on the board. Her name was on the board. Grotch looked at the board for a moment. He said something to the man beside him, quiet enough that I couldn't catch it. Wells ignored it. I had gone back and looked at her paperwork myself the evening of Day 4, because the operation briefing was coming, and I wanted to know what we were going into with. What I found had the effect of making me sit down in the chair in front of the terminal and spend several minutes doing nothing. Her formal specialty was listed as maritime operations and direct action. Her certification levels were at the top of what our documentation framework showed, which meant they had simply run out of ways to add more checkboxes. Her operational experience column contained a number of entries that were flagged with a classification marker that meant the specific operations were not available in the unclassified version of her record that I was reading. The unclassified version alone contained 11 direct action operations, 3 counterterrorism qualifications, 2 years as a team lead, and a notation about an advanced marksmanship certification that I had to read twice. She was a Navy SEAL. Not a SEAL-adjacent asset or a supported attachment or any of the other vocabulary people sometimes use to describe people who work adjacent to that community. She had earned the qualification through the same course, the same training, the same attrition rate. She was, in every formal and operational sense of the word, a SEAL. And she had been transferred to our unit, and Grotch had called her New Girl, and 4 men had pinned her in her bunk at 2300, and the morning after all of that she had gone to PT and run the circuit faster than anyone else. I did not sleep well on night 5 either. The operation ran on night 6. The coastal terrain was what the brief had described. Rough tidal shoreline, significant noise from wave action, 300-meter approach through shallow water, to a structure set back from a rocky beach with 2 entry points and a projected 4-person occupancy. Standard parameters for a team that knew what it was doing. Not comfortable parameters. The tide window was 22 minutes, and the water temperature was cold enough that extended immersion was a consideration, but standard. She was on the water approach lead, which I believe Wells had assigned based on her paperwork rather than on any sentimental evaluation, because Wells was not a man who made sentimental mission assignments. I had watched him review that paperwork, as I described, and I think he had simply put the most qualified person in the lead role, which is the correct thing to do, and which any competent commander does when the mission matters more than the optics. The water approach in tidal coastal terrain is the most technically demanding part of that kind of operation. Cold, disorienting, the footing on rock and sand uncertain and variable, the wave noise covering sound in both directions so that communication is by hand signals and position, the timeline dictated by tide cycles that do not accommodate mistakes or hesitation. I have done this kind of approach enough times to know that the person leading it sets the pace and the coherence for everyone behind them, and that if the leader is not certain, the team absorbs the uncertainty. She ran it like it was familiar, because it was familiar. She moved through the water at the pace the mission required, no faster and no slower. She communicated by hand signal and body position, clean signals, readable at distance in low light and wave noise, issued without hesitation, which means they were not being decided in the moment, but were coming out of the same trained automatic that runs in operators who have done this enough times that the decisions live in the body rather than the mind. She positioned the entry team at the structure's first entry point with 4 minutes remaining in the tide window, called the breach on the signal, and was through the first entry point before I had cleared the second fire position assigned to me. The structure was controlled in 4 minutes and 11 seconds from breach. The target element was secured without incident. We exited on timeline with 6 minutes remaining in the window, which is a margin that tells you the person running the approach was not improvising. On the exfil crossing the tidal flat in the dark, Grotch moved up alongside her. I saw it happen because I was 2 positions behind. I could not hear what he said because the wave noise covered everything at that distance, and we were maintaining noise discipline in any case. I could see the shape of it. He came up even with her, said something that took about 3 seconds, and she looked at him with the same level attention she had given everything else that night and through the whole of that week. She did not stop moving. She held her pace and her direction, and he matched it for a few steps and then fell back to his position. I could see that he said something, and that she looked at him, and that he looked away first. He did not call her new girl again, not on the exfil and not in the days after. The day after the operation, Lieutenant Commander Wells called a unit meeting. He did not describe the meeting as anything specific in the scheduling notice, and I did not know what it was going to be about until we were in the room. He stood at the front of the room and he said, in the specific cadence of a man who is not delivering a speech but is delivering a record, "I have reviewed the events of 3 nights ago in the barracks. I have the names. I want to be direct with you about what that event was and what it was not. It was not a tradition. It was not an acceptable informal practice. It was an assault on a member of this unit, and the qualifications of the member assaulted make it, additionally, one of the more profoundly mistaken acts I have witnessed in 18 years. He paused. The men who participated will be meeting with me and the JAG officer individually, beginning at 1300. I recommend each of you speak to the JAG officer before those meetings. The member in question has filed a report, and I have endorsed it. He said nothing more on the topic. He went directly into the operations calendar. She was in the room for all of it. She sat in the second row with her hands flat on her knees and her expression steady. When Wells said her name, which he said once plainly as context, she did not react in any visible way. She did not look at Grotch. She did not look at me. She looked at the front of the room at Wells and she listened. I went to her after the meeting. I had been thinking about what to say for 3 days and I had not gotten it right in my head yet, and what came out was inadequate, but it was honest. I said, I should have moved. That night. I didn't and I'm sorry. She looked at me for a moment. She said, you're going to move next time. Not a question and not a prediction in the way of someone reading a future. It sounded like a determination, the specific kind a person makes when they have been watching others closely and have arrived at a conclusion about character that is separate from the single instance they're referencing. I said, yes, ma'am. She nodded once and walked out. The formal actions against Grotch and the two others took the route that formal actions take. I will not recount the specifics. What I will say is that the unit changed after that meeting and after those proceedings, and the change was not quiet or comfortable, but it was real. When she walked into an operations brief, the room did not go to the particular quality of casual dismissal it had gone to in those first days. It went to the quality of attention that is appropriate when a qualified person is in the room and about to say something relevant. That change is worth describing because it did not happen by announcement or by any ceremony. It happened by the weight of what had been demonstrated. She ran operations, wrote clean reports, and took her place on the team board as a team lead on the fourth rotation, which was Wells's call and was the correct one. The men who had been in that barracks on night 3 did their work alongside her and said nothing about night 3 because there was nothing to say. The record had been established in the tidal water and the 4-minute structure clearance and the 6-minute margin on the exfil window. The record spoke for itself, the way records of that quality always do, without requiring anyone to explain them. She never acknowledged any of it. She did not reference the hazing again, to my knowledge, in any direct way. She did her work and let the work be the accounting. The last thing I will say is about call signs, because she had one and it matters to the story. Her call sign was Salt Lane. I did not know that in the first 3 days. I learned it on day 5 when I read her paperwork. After I had read it, I went back to the barracks and I looked at her bunk in the corner and I thought about what salt line means, the line on a shore where the sea comes up to and leaves its mark, the line that the tide draws, and that does not move regardless of what the weather does above it. That is the line she was, that week and every week after it. The tide came up, the line did not move.